Oh
A
my
lot of
God, I
people.
love Lebanon.
Is crypto and Web3 the solution here?
Yes and no.
You have $144 billion in your bank account. What would be your life mission?
Hey, I've been to school. I didn't like this. How can I change this? Jeffrey, you don't belong here. And I was like, what? What do you mean? I had no interest, did not want to be there. I was very uncomfortable. I went to this meetup, and it was the best thing I ever did. One day, someone will pay me the money from what I know. We also built a venture firm. I had no idea what venture was. So it just had said investment group.
If I were a fly on the wall,
Well, it's interesting. Hopefully I was like that as a kid. People want challenges all the time. We worked for them or worked with them.
hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of the AI Best Business Show, the show where you'll best learn about business, entrepreneurship, tech, and the startup world. Today with me, I have a special guest, Jeffrey. I'll let Jeffrey introduce himself with this. With all the success you've had, if we were to end the podcast after 1 minute from now, what is one statement you'll give the audience that changed their life?
Well, it's a pleasure being here, Ahmed. It really is. I do enjoy, as we were chatting before, to be able and have the opportunities to jump on with like-minded podcasters and people that see the world a little bit differently and want to find ways to help and give back. And I find this is a great forum for that. So thank you for having me. For jumping into your first question, I guess, on if I had 1 minute or what would be my statement, it's a great question because, and I could spend time just analyzing everything and what's the best way around it. I think if you're a true entrepreneur and you really want to dive into what you think is best, it's getting behind your product, it's getting behind you and what your drive is. And you have all those famous lines of just do it, get out there, put yourself in the mix. It really does come down to that. We can all work for someone, and there's nothing wrong with that. People will work for you as a founder. You'll work for other people along the way. You're going to learn throughout the journey of life, and that's really what it's about. So if you haven't tried, how are you going to know if you could ever have been successful? And maybe the first time you might not find success that you think could deem as success. And I think you have to determine what success means to you. Success could be a lot of money. Success could be making a lot of connections, or success could be learning a lot and taking that into your next role. So I think you really have to define what you believe success is. And when you jump into something, just know that you got to go all in, put all the time in, and take a lot of input from a lot of people. And I think the best thing you can do is network, learn, communicate, and all of these skills you'll build on and you'll get better at. And I think if you just try it, that's where you're going to get the best outcome. So I guess the one-liner I would say, if I had the time to go back and redo it all, it would be that I would have went all in and been confident about what I was doing and just said, hey, this is me. I'm out here. I'm pushing, and find like-minded people, build your army or your team of supporters, and then get out there and push and build your business.
Okay. You speak about success and you speak about pushing behind what you believe or what your passion is. What was success for you, or what was passion for you?
It's interesting because the passion for me, when I first started as a software engineer way back in the day, 20 plus years ago, success for me was I broke things down into three areas. And I would share this with everybody that there's three things that you look for when you take a role or you're progressing through anything. And those three things are how much money are you going to be paid or make? What am I going to learn? And who am I going to meet? Those are the three main things that you have to do in every meeting that you're going to go into, or any engagement or anything you start. And the reason why I say that is because you can't have all three. They can't all be the top notch, because then obviously there wouldn't be any challenge for you. So you have to kind of pick what you think is most important to you at the time. And for me, my most important always was, what am I going to learn?
Okay.
And because I fit a lot into the very introverted the side where your abilities are not as forthcoming. You're not always driven to be in the forefront. I'm not the face of the business. I don't want to be the
Okay.
driver. I want to be the one in the background doing the work and providing the solutions. So I call that the solutionist. And then you have the front person. So the front person is the one that drives the business, the Bill Gates, all of these people. They're at the front. And then you have to choose between those two stages where you want to be in a business. Well, in order to run a business, you have to be the front person. So
Right.
it becomes an uncomfortableness that you have to change and put yourself in there. And uncomfortableness is the best. That's what gets you driving and motivated in the morning. So as me trying to take myself from being a solutionist as an introvert into that front role, it's very tough. So I kind of bounced in and out of it. I didn't have the confidence to jump into that main front role. So you find people that can do that within your realm, but you continue to build and be a solutionist. So as time went, and I went and took a role in the largest retailer in Canada, which is Loblaws, and I started working there as an engineer, and then built all of their e-commerce companies 20 years ago. That's when I started working with early stage. But what came out of that was that I had this desire and drive to solve problems, and I saw everything as a problem, and how can I fix it, or what's the best way to fix it. But while I was there, all I cared about was learning. So I worked a lot of hours. And that's where those three buckets came in. Was it about money? No. Was it about meeting people? That was secondary. But the primary was, what can I learn? So if I put enough time in, I used to say, one day someone will pay me the money from what I know.
Okay.
And I learned. I took courses, I did other degrees, I did a lot of things to just build my base to be as strong as I could. But at the end of the day, it was also about who I was going to meet, because those people can help you in the future, which means you have to build a rapport and you have to build value within those people. And then the best thing that came out of those networking pieces was that you had to be an execution person. Nobody wants to work with somebody that does things half-assed or never gets anything done.
Right.
So if you want to build a strong network, learn as much as you can and work with people and show them that you can execute and get things done and deliver value. So the number one thing is deliver value, because they'll always remember you for what you delivered. They won't remember you for anything else. They may remember some fails, but they care as what you delivered them. And fast forward to today, that's really what it comes down to, is execution, networks, and the people that support your knowledge and base and what you're trying to achieve.
So I guess to put it in perspective, when you put in the time and the work to learn and to achieve, along while doing this for over 10, 15 years, along the way, you'll meet people that will see your work and execution that you'll be able to network with. And eventually, once you get the knowledge, you'll get someone who'll pay you, or you'll get a payday through a startup or the execution you have done.
Pretty much
You,
exactly to that. Yes, correct.
you speak a lot about learning and getting a lot of knowledge. Looking at your LinkedIn and just doing some research, I noticed you're a part-time professor and mentor professor at it's Seneca College, right? Someone in your position and your success, what motivates you to teach or to put in or to take a part-time position as a professor or mentor?
For sure. Great question. Well, I think what it started all was about, I'm going to say it was 6, 7 years ago. I just got to a point where, again, you've taken in a lot of time working, supporting, and learning. And there was an opportunity that came to me where it was, we're looking for ways to build on the entrepreneur side. And
Right.
being that one of the colleges I had gone to 20 plus years ago was at Seneca, I thought this would be a great opportunity. And what I was looking for was, I wanted to find a way to give back, a
Okay.
way to change the narrative. Instead of always being outdriven and doing all of these great things, how can I build a community, and how can I help other younger people vision solving problems and then building companies around that? So that's really how it started. I also went back and jumped into coaching football and or soccer, American soccer, football. And that was also a passion, because I'm a huge soccer fan, which football fan. And that's why we have a fund called the Supporters Fund. And that was built around the premise of us being the supporters of the team, right? We want to help those entrepreneurs grow and build
Right.
their company. So that's where the name came from. But all of that was part of the same journey. It was just got to a point where we decided there had to be a different way that we could give back, help support new entrepreneurs. And then when we built OPN, the Open People Network, it was all about, again, supporting a community and building community first and finding ways to help support them. And we ran many events, I think over 125 events in total today. And all of these events were made and placed for the founder to be able to get access to investors and get in front of more investors and community. And that all started because of a way that we felt that we could give back and help these people build companies. We've been through a lot in building Hardboot, which is our first, my first company where we do resourcing for big pharma, bank, and health tech globally. And we thought, well, if this is what we're going to build and we're going to be able to do all this, we've got a lot of learnings. We've had to hire companies, build companies in other countries, and we go through a lot of things where you learn how and what not to do, or you get bit a few times because you tried something that didn't work. And sure, in time, those can change. Governments can change, but really it comes down to is that you made the effort to try, you took the learning. Now, how do you get that back into other people's hands? And you could create 12 different podcasts and analyze everything, or you can just find ways that intrinsically you're working beside people and you're sharing insight. But the other great thing that came out of that in the teaching side was that you learned a lot as well. You learned more about yourself, you learned more about how the younger people are interacting with professors or interacting with other students, or how they're sharing and seeing the world. So when we would dive into startup analysis and say, what kind of company do you want to build? It was fascinating to learn what types of businesses that the younger people were wanting to build. And then you started to understand, well, what the businesses they're trying to build is because their lack of vision in the world, because they're really young and they've only seen these metrics in a business or in a world. So how do you get them out there and exploring more so that they can see that there's more problems to solve and bigger ones that are able to solve and more scalable? So a lot of that learning came on both sides. So it wasn't really this one-sided, I'll push out and never learn anything. It was very dual-sided. It was, I'm going to go in and learn as much as I can about everything that's in here. I turned it into a test bed. So we were able to test the different hypotheses and learnings as well. So we came up with different ways to enable better teaching. And then other professors picked up some of the programs that we built. And it was just because we see the world a little bit differently as an entrepreneur. So you're always trying to find ways like, hey, I've been to school, I didn't like this, how can I change this? So you started to implement those as well, and you found, wow, this is kind of cool, this is a lot of fun, and the students really appreciate it. So then you keep building on that. So there was learning on both sides, and it really was really exciting, and it helped me kick off this whole area of us diving in and supporting and investing in early stage companies.
It's interesting what you just mentioned, because I mean, when it's always when you get to a certain age or when you're surrounded by a certain group, your mind just is limited by the thinking of the people around you. But then when you surround yourself with younger people or older people, you start having this wider range of thoughts surrounding you, which gets you a wider horizon of thinking and ideas coming in. I want to ask, like, out of these students or classes you've taught, was there a student that went out to build a startup that you've invested in, or was there a student that came in and you've hired at one of the companies you've started? Like, was there a success story from these classes you've taught?
You know, there's a lot of really cool stories that came out of about teaching. One of them is, and I shared a little bit before, that we created a program. Well, one of the programs we created was, and again, this is taking from obviously when you're thinking about it, the introverted side of the things that I didn't do, which I felt would be very beneficial to people, young people, older people. And the program was that we created was that for a couple points in their program grades, that we would give, let's give a number, I think it was say 3%, but you'd get a 3% grade. And what you had to do is you had to go outside of the university or college and you had to attend an event. And at this event, you had to write a one-pager of what you experienced, what you liked, what you disliked. And then you had to staple or find 3 business cards. So you had to introduce yourself to 3 people, and you had to take a selfie of yourself to prove that you actually went to this event with speaker or somebody at the event so that you could prove this. And what was great about this was that it was because I never pushed myself to go and put myself in uncomfortable positions, which was go to events and meet people. And the thing was that I learned over time was that every time I went to an event, I always went there to meet 3 people. And I would research beforehand 3 people that I knew that were going to be there to make it less discomforting and more comfortable by finding 3 people, knowing about them. And then I could pitch them and say, you know, I know all this about you, you're amazing. So it broke down the uncomfortableness, but it allowed me to force myself to have an introduction. And then I would leave with 3 contacts and I felt like I solved the world. So I put this program together for the students. And a lot of the feedback was, And I would say 80% of the students did it because it's 3%. So that's better, that it's the best way to get it. And what they came back with, and one of the students had written, I had no interest, did not want to be there. I was very uncomfortable. I went to this meetup, and it was the best thing I ever did. I met 3 people and I was offered to go in and talk about a job. And that's what got me excited, was that, okay, this does work and it does get people out of their comfort zone. And to go back to the point of what we learned in class, we would run and operate these at the beginning of class. Instead of just diving into what we're going to learn today, I actually wanted to know what they learned. So every class we would have 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and it would be a news broadcast. And everybody had to have one piece of information that they could share that they learned today. So your class could be 30, 40, 50 people, but at the end of the day, you would handpick a bunch. And over that time period, you would talk about social things that were going on, or things that they learned about, things they didn't know about. And there was one student that really stood out, and it was a young, and I won't name names, but a young Russian guy. He was the youngest of all the people in the class. I think at the time he was 17. Everybody was probably 19 or older. But his acumen, his understanding, his logical analysis, everything that he did just was phenomenal. And he always put in the extra time. So you kind of see yourself in a lot of people and you're like, that's how I was when I was a kid, I guess, in a way. But it just always resonated because he was there to work hard, succeed, have the best grades, and make sure that he was able to go on and build either a business or work for somebody.
Right.
And he was probably one of the students that really stood out, because I had him throughout multiple years. And he really stood out because of the way he approached school, the way he approached life. And he had awesome grades, very, very smart intellect, and very well driven. So there was a lot of people like that, of course, in the program, and you meet a lot of people like that. But sometimes you do have someone that might stand out just because of maybe you see something yourself in someone and you thought, maybe that's how I was, and hopefully I was like that as a kid. But at the point is that there's you're going to meet a lot of amazing people, and I did. I got to have a lot of great conversations, and it was very fulfilling to be able to help other people on their journey as well.
No, I get excited and happy to hear that, because I think I'm going through my MBA program. I finished my bachelor degree, and I think a lot of the structure of how we go and learn is somehow outdated, and we need new programs in different ways that push you to extend your limits and learn in a different environment, different way. You mentioned Hardboot earlier, and before speaking about what Hardboot is, I want to, before you started Hardboot, when you were sitting there having a conversation with your co-founder or with the people surrounding you, what was the conversation like before starting it? What was the state of the staffing industry? What gaps did you see? What gaps were you speaking about? If I were a fly on the wall when you were sitting and speaking about these gaps, what would have I heard you speaking about?
Well, it's interesting because when I first started Hardboot, and I only realized this maybe a few years ago, because I found a document I keep things in a folder, just random ideas.
Right.
And what it was and I ended up following up on this through the conversation to learning more about where this came from, why I built this document. And what was fascinating is you hear all of these things where, plan today and it'll come to the fruition in the future. And I never thought of that because 20 years ago, you didn't hear a lot of that stuff. But what came out of this document that I found, which was, as I mentioned, rather fascinating, was that it laid out the entirety of how I envisioned this business working. Okay. So it envisioned that, and this was written before the company even started. So this was written in 2005. Wow. And the way we had put this map together, mind map, I think it was 2005 or it was 2001. It was it was when I was working at Loblaws. And what the mind map was is that we would have marketing, sales, and generation in Canada. And then we would own a company in Philippines or another country. And that's where we would resource all of our talent from. Okay. And then we also built a venture firm. So then there was a side business and it said venture firm. And this was what's fascinating about this is that I had no idea what venture was. So it just had said investment group. So I thought that was fascinating that years later, we ended up building exactly this. And when we started Hardboot, It actually was started by, I originally came up with the name uh, back in 1996.
Wow.
I think I registered it in 97. And the name came from cold booting your computer. So computers were starting to become obviously an in thing at the time. And I wanted to come up with something that was unique in a way to kind of show, I guess, my nerdy self, which was another term for cold booting, which was turning your computer on and off, which means start up, turning it on and off,
Right.
and making something build and grow and run. So that's where hard booting came from, was that you would hard boot your computer, which is turning it off and on, or cold booting, turning it from an off version to new or on. So that's where the name came from. And then the business model actually came up with was during my Loblaws days. So I had actually pitched two of the senior directors at Loblaws at the time. I didn't remember this until they brought it up to me. But I had pitched them if they wanted to leave Loblaws to start a new company, that I
Oh,
had the
wow.
name and this is what we wanted to do. Unfortunately, the two gentlemen, awesome guys, they were mentors to me because they were senior level directors in IT. So we were, I indirectly worked for them or worked with them. And at the time, they weren't so much into entrepreneurship, but most weren't because it was very risky. But I had pitched them on the model, and that's where it started. So I guess when I had continued through my journey, I left Loblaws and went to a startup. That's where I learned the desire to go in to be a startup. And that started from that earlier pitch. And then it carried on just before I left Loblaws. My boss at the time, who was the vice president of e-commerce, he told me, Jeffrey, you don't belong here. And I was like, what? What do you mean? And he said, well, you need to be working for yourself. And that kind of started that journey. It triggered me to have an interest in going out on my own. And then a couple of other pieces along the way over the next 6 months pushed me to create that company, where I had met with another entrepreneur, and he also wanted me to work for him. And then he kind of painted me into this box that I was non-risk taking. And that kind of triggered my interest to say, I am risk taking. I should do this. So I think listening to the people and the voices around you enables you to analyze and say, is this something I should dive into and take the risk? And that's what we did. So I dove out and started the business. And then years later found this document, which made me realize, man, I had been planning this for so long that it was great that we finally got out and built it. Not knowing that it was a plan that was baked. So I think in time, if you start to put these plans together in your mind of where you want to be or what you want to build, eventually in time that execution is going to come, and you have to decide: am I willing to risk everything to jump into this, or do I continue to stay in the comfort zone that I'm in? And there's nothing wrong with the comfort zone at all. But if you have that itch to try and build and be on your own, then that's what you have to do. And I guess I've been entrepreneurial since I was a kid. So for me, it wasn't a far stretch, but you do get comfortable pretty easy when you're getting a great paycheck every day.
Okay. What is Hardboot? What was the pitch for Hardboot at this time, and how did the pitch change? I mean, it's been over 20 years now. So what was the original pitch of Hardboot, and what is the pitch of it right now?
Well, if you look back at our original logo, I did it in paint. So it was, and I have zero design skills, so it's pretty funny looking. But Hardboot originally started as being a software engineer space. We wanted to build code, build networks, communications, different things. So we came up with a lot of different ideas, but that's originally what it started. Where it ended up going to when we first kicked off the real structure of the business is that we were managed outsourcing for companies to build platforms.
Okay.
So we built over 600-700 platforms over the first 10-15 years of the business. So we were a resource shop for that. So we did everything from project management to business analysis, design, the whole piece. So we built the platform from things in Walmart to HomeSense. We took the whole platform, rebuilt it. And then over time, we started to realize that our niche wasn't in the fact that we were great at building process and getting projects delivered. What we found was that we were better at resourcing the people that made these great projects or supported great tech. And that's where we decided to start shifting. So we decided to put the onus on the business to build the product they wanted to, but we would provide them with the talent. So that's where the business shifted to. So we realized that we were good at finding great people to build, but we were even better at getting them into the seats of businesses. So over time, we shifted to instead of delivering projects and saying, hey, we've delivered 500 projects, we went into, hey, we can deliver some great talent that are going to help you build. And we can build this from all countries in the world. So we started to do that. And that's where we started to build companies in Pakistan, Philippines, Egypt, and Toronto. And that's where the support came in for what we were doing. So that's how we pivoted. And that's what we do today.
How do you how do you find great talent, or how do you identify great talent? Is there I mean, when you invest in startups as an angel investor or as an investor, you have a checklist of, okay, this is the checklist I'm going to use to invest in a startup. Is there a checklist you have to find great talent?
Well, there is a process behind everything, of course, and you can continue to enable the process and learn from it and find where you don't want to look for and what
Right.
things you want to look for. So just like you would if you're looking for a company and where it checks those boxes off, you have the same on the talent side. I think what we try to do is utilize our community as, I think you mentioned it earlier. If you've built a great company, then a lot of people want to support that company or be part of it. So it's looking for people that work for great companies, but also want to try something different and get into a different style of company and something great as well. So you're looking at where the accomplishments people have completed, and then looking at it from the perspective of people want challenges all the time. So you need to find people that have that mindset of, I could be working from home, I could be working in Starbucks, but I love what I do, and I want to be able to build on this. But I also know that this business model or this business I'm working in might last 1 year, but then I'm going to get to do a new project. So
Right.
there's also the excitement of being able to work for one employer, but have 12 different projects that you got to work on in that duration. We've had people that have worked for us over 10 years, and they've got to
Wow.
bounce in and out of so many different companies. And, going in and saying on your resume that you work for one company, but you had 100 doors, that's pretty exciting. So I think there's a lot of value that comes from being able to continually challenge the people that work for your company by giving them so many different options, projects and business models that they can focus on. I think that makes a difference.
Do you ever plan on selling Hardboot or exiting it or IPOing it, or do you want it to be a cash flow generating business?
It's a great question, because today I'm sure the world looks at things a little bit differently. You have assets that generate cash flow, you have assets that you're looking at in the future. There is an opportunity for us to do this in the future. Our goal, actually, because of our new third fund we have, which is a roll-up fund, and we are focused on acquiring companies and building better, bigger, stronger companies in a shorter time by acquisition. So I think there's a real high potential that in the future we can look at uh, utilizing ourselves in this model. When you get to yourself into a position where it's either cash flow positive or you're self-generating and you can build up a great value, then is there an opportunity to tie that into other companies? Or does it maintain what it's doing and continue to support our portfolio companies? I think there's a lot of value in supporting the companies you have to get them to success. So maybe that is the ultimate goal, is that it doesn't need to be sold. It just needs to continue to support and morph into helping the portfolio companies we have and others out there. And maybe that's the win, because if we can continue to help and grow and you're still generating revenue and value, but you're helping other companies succeed to exit, then maybe that's where the win comes to. So I think in the future, we'll see how it goes. I'm sure I've got a million plans in my head, and maybe I'll write them down on a mind map and look back and see if we ended up hitting what we said. So for
Uh,
sure.
I'll be interested in having this podcast in another 10 years and look back at the mind map you wrote today. Uh, Moving on from Hardboot, I saw you've invested in Flow Alkaline Spring Water, which is, looking at your portfolio at what you do, I found it a little bit like shock. I'm like, okay, it's it's not a software business, it's not a online business, it's a real life physical company, it's not a tech company. Why did you invest in it?
Great question. So originally, the way it worked out, and I know there's always a story to everything that you do. So being that I worked at Loblaws, which is the grocery retailer, I did a lot of things there, working in products. So helped
Right.
invent a few products, supported e-commerce, there was a lot of things that we did, because when you're enthralled in a business and you really dive into it and you learn all the ins and outs of procurement and operations and finance, marketing, you build into so many areas. Your interest levels obviously expand. And being that I worked in a grocery store as a youth, also had a big understanding. I worked in the same one, so it allowed me to kind of work my way through and learn a lot. So when I first started to make investments 12 years ago, we were investing in, again, different buckets from, as you mentioned, a lot of software, a lot of type of SaaS model companies, things that had reoccurring revenue, etc. And there was a really great opportunity that came up, and I'll share a bit of the story only because it is quite fascinating. And what it worked out was that when I worked at the grocery store, I guess it would have been 35 years ago.
Right.
When I worked at the grocery store, and I had met a gentleman there, a great guy, and we hung out quite a bit when we were kids. We both played hockey and different sports, and that kind of stuff. And then as you got older, you started to lose traction, and you kind of lose touch with people, of course. And I had this moment where a place that we had invested in, a property, we had met some people there. This was 8 years ago, 9 years ago. And they said, go check out my LinkedIn page. And I said, all right, if you find anybody there you want to meet, let me know and I'll introduce you. So I went and I looked at it just briefly, and I saw someone there. I like, that person looks familiar. So I read their profile and I'm like, man, they look so familiar, but I couldn't figure out how I do them. And then the next day I got a LinkedIn message from that person, and they said, hey, you look familiar, we should chat. So we did. We jumped on a call. I would say it was a Zoom call, but I'm sure it was a Skype chat or something. And we started chatting, and I said, you look familiar. Do you know this guy? And we started to try to piece it together, and he said the same. And we realized that we had met each other when we were kids.
Wow.
And we met through the mutual friend, and we had hung out a bunch of times, but that was obviously quite some time past. So he started to pitch me on his business. And when he did, I instantly gravitated to, this is amazing. I love what you're doing. It was all about ESG before ESG became anything. But the big difference that Nicholas put together when he built Flow was that he was hitting an area which was getting rid of plastic and going into box water. He was the first one to bring box water. But there was another first that he brought that really, really resonated with me. And it makes a big difference in today's world, or at any point in time, is that what he did is that it was an oversaturated market of water. Everybody had bottled water. It was the number one selling product at Loblaws. Number one selling product in the entire grocery retailer was plastic water bottles, because it was, for some reason, it was the biggest thing. They were selling billions of it, which is crazy to think about, that you can get it out of a tap, yet it was the number one selling product in a food store. So what ended up happening was that he built a brand. And that was the difference, is that water wasn't branded. Water was a commodity, a convenience, and he built a lifestyle brand around it and then put it into a box. And that's what impressed me. That's what just blew my mind about how amazing this business is, but how amazing what he was building. And then he surrounded himself with a lot of amazing people, executives. And oddly enough, those executives I had worked for at Loblaws. So they were senior level executives that all gravitated to investing in him and building his company. And that was also the third part that really drove me into wanting to invest in his company. And that's why we jumped in. So you don't have to go in and be a unique product or something that doesn't exist and try to change the market. What you need to do is, can you build a company and solve a problem that's right in front of you? And can you be the brand that stands out above everybody else?
Okay. You're an angel investor, you have different funds. What I want to touch on before I go into this is the state of the Canadian tech ecosystem and startup ecosystem. Most of my interviews are with people in the MENA region or sometimes in the US. So it's a first to learn about the Canadian ecosystem. I would love to hear about you. What's the state of the Canadian startup ecosystem, technology ecosystem, and where do you see it going in the next 5-10 years?
Well, the just like the rest of the world, and especially in the MENA region has obviously a lot of dollars coming into it. From the Saudi perspective, there's a lot of dollars being pushed through. You look at, say, Egypt, where they're hitting a recession before most are even seeing a recession, right? They haven't even got that stage. So the money flows in different ways. And you see we're the same spot where it comes to the US. They have the money, and we're going to get hit with a recession before the rest of the people. So you have regions that support each other and regions that are obviously a lot more advanced. So when it comes to the tech sector in Canada, it's like everywhere you read, it's thriving, it's growing, everybody's part of it. When you're a larger country, smaller amount of people, you tend to go and gravitate to the areas that are going to be more fast advancing, more entrepreneurial, more tech based, because you have to chase where the money is going to be and you have to get there before it lands. So that's kind of where smaller communities tend to do. And that's where you see the Canadian tech ecosystem is that we're developing an advanced development in a lot of areas, quantum computing, AI, etc. And the reason being is that you're a smaller subset, so you can find where the needle is going to drop and you can go and start to build companies in that area. So there gets to be a lot of interest. So the talent pool is obviously a lot tough because it's distributed. It gets picked up by North American and European and other groups. So you do have to battle that side of things. So it does, one day you might have all the great talent, the next day it's all working in the US and getting paid big bucks everywhere. So there is a lot of fluctuation in the market. So that allows for businesses to flourish by helping and supporting that. And especially when it comes to the tech resourcing side. When it comes to where the businesses are going to go and where this is going to look like in the next few years, in the late 60s, there was two people that were contracted out, and the names are going to elude me right now, but they were contracted out to build a landscape of where Canada was going to be in 50 years. And you can look it up. There's a document. It's, I don't know, 300 pages. I read it a long time ago. But what was fascinating about this document was that they were proposing that Canada became a brain trust, an area where we weren't going to do any of the labor jobs. We weren't going to do anything other than be management driven, brain trained. So everything was about how do you become a society that just focuses on building strategy and building out great companies and businesses. And if you fast forward to where it is today, I think they actually hit that target. Canada has become really a dominant force in that consulting, that trading strategy, building out the brain side. So where does it go in the next 50 years? I'm sure they're going to build something out that's going to say, this is where we think the country should be. But I think where the state of it is that everybody is coming to Canada to pull talent out because they have great universities. They have a lot of strategy and technologists. So there is a lot of that being pulled away. Eventually that's going to come back in. And I think over the next 10 years, you'll see a lot even stronger, better companies that are going to come out of here because you're taking that knowledge that's been pushed out, and those people are eventually going to want to come back into Canada, and they're going to start to build new and better companies. And you're starting to see that now. A recession can drive that because people tend to flock back home, and hopefully that's the case. I think the number was something like during the pandemic, there was 3 million Canadians abroad. Well, think about 3 million Canadians coming back home with all of that global experience and what they're going to be able to do. So I think the progress that's going to happen in the country is going to be, again, building a lot more of that knowledge base, growing better, stronger companies, and you're going to see a lot more leadership come out of that, which I think is pretty exciting.
That this fascinates me because I'm from Lebanon originally, and
oh my God, I love Lebanon.
And a lot of people leave Lebanon and go outside. A lot of Lebanese people, and they learn and they succeed in the positions outside of Lebanon. But what we lack is coming back to Lebanon and building a better Lebanon. And so the idea of Canadians going out, getting the knowledge in the US or Europe and coming back to build a better Canada is really amazing there. You have the supporters fund and OPN. I want to start with the supporters fund. What is the thesis behind it?
For sure. So as we had done with Hardboot, we started to pivot during time. So as we were growing our first two funds, we were all about early stage, first money in, build and help support that ecosystem. Today, we've shifted our thesis around being an acquisition model, so an acquisition fund. So we wanted to be a roll-up fund. So we created a whole new model because we found that we wanted to shift the liability and the risk and blend it so that it was based off of the founders as well as the investors, so that we all had a lot to gain and a lot to lose. So how do we blend this and make it work better? So we wanted to support that by creating an acquisition fund where we still are first money in, but we grow our companies by acquisition. And that means globally. So we can take a company in Saudi, we could take a Dubai, wherever that might be. We can back that founder. We love the model, love what they're doing. We'll back the founder, and then we'll find companies to roll up and invest into and acquire on behalf of the founder, so that we can take them from 100,000 ARR to 50 million over 5 years. And that's really our goal. So that we're raising to build a fund on that side of it. And we will continue to focus on the deep tech side, which is AI, machine learning, blockchain. We're going to focus still on those areas. And we will continue to sprinkle in, of course, the fintech side on decentralizing, as well as the CPG side, because of our successes in the consumer packaged goods space. But we really are honing in our focus on the deep technology side.
Okay. And I love this. One of my goals, and here I'm speaking a little bit about myself, is I like this idea about rolling up different companies, and I think the MENA region really needs that. We probably have 25 different fast delivery companies that are all over the place in different places. And I mean, the MENA region could be consolidated into one or two, but we have 25 of them. So having a roll-up fund where you could find a founder who's great at what they're doing in this specific startup and go in and help them acquire the rest of these startups and have a consolidated bigger startup is a fascinating idea for me. What I want to understand from you, you were kind of a VC fund and you moved down to a roll-up fund. What are the main differences? Like where is the main differences? What are the pros and cons of each?
For sure. Well, you're still a venture capitalist. So
Mhm.
no matter how you skin the cat as a roll-up fund or as a classic standard investment fund, you're still a venture capitalist. So you're investing other people's money. So that's really the determination for it. What is the difference between the two? I'll say that when you're a standard classic fund, everything is put into a box. So
Right.
your box is that I don't want to go outside of this. It's true. It's tested. People know that this is what we do and nothing more. So what we've done is we've tried to take that same philosophy and morph this roll-up fund into that. So the roll-up fund has to be very precise, put in a box so that everybody can understand that this is the way you make money, this is how this operates, and this is the outcome. If it's too open-ended, that's what it scares people, it scares other investors. So I think when we first originally went in, we thought, okay, this could be a little bit more open-ended. And what we're realizing is that when we have the closed off box where this is how you invest and this is how it works, that's what interests people, because you've tested it. There isn't ways for people to get into your box and break it
Right.
and make mistakes and lose money. So if you can build that other roll-up fund to being the same way, that's where you'll see the success. So we've been trying to really hone in on that opportunity. So the big difference is that as a roll-up fund, you're acquiring multiple companies under one founder and you're investing a lot into one founder. In a standard classic fund, you may only make 2 or 3 investments at most into a company, and then your value drops as it gets diluted over years. Our case is that we're supporting them as far as we possibly can through the acquisitions, which increases our value in the company. So there is obviously a big difference between the two, but underlying principles are the same.
Okay. You mentioned you invest in areas deep tech, real estate, CPG, and fintech. Why deep tech? I think a lot of investors tend to shy away from deep tech, and I think the future is in deep tech. And my investment theory is with cost of energy going to zero and GPUs and going from CPUs to GPUs, we really need investments in deep tech to change how our ecosystem is going to be. Why did you decide to focus on deep tech personally?
For that exact reason, because very few people understand it. And being that I'm an ex-software engineer, I've worked a lot in this space. I spent a lot of time on servers and coding and diving in and out of every system you can imagine. I can tell you a million funny stories of things that we had to test and learn along over the last 20, 30 years. But that's really what got us into it was, I think I can go back to a story where when I first started Hardboot, and I was working with a group in Mars, which is one of the biggest groups in Canada,
Okay.
and they help support the early stage companies. And if you look them up, you'll see a lot of great things that they've accomplished over the better part of the last 10 years, 10, 15 years. But when I first was meeting with them, I was meeting with startups, and they had the lady I was working with, which she's phenomenal, strategist, and she's she was introducing me to the startup, and we were talking, and the startup founder walked by, and she yelled to the person, "Oh, I got to introduce you to Jeffrey. You got to meet this guy. He's a CTO." And after working with her for months, I was like, "CTO? I'm not a CTO. I'm a business person." In my head, I kept thinking, why does everybody classify me as a
Dependence.
CTO? And it's because what you're good at is what people will remember you by.
Right.
And because I came from being a CTO, I came from understanding tech and building tech, it was hard to just go out and say, I'm going to be somebody completely different, or I'm going to be not knowledgeable in this area anymore. That's who you are. It's ingrained in you. And that actually took to heart. And I accepted that and said, you know what? You're right. I am a CTO. I am somebody that understands tech, engineering, and how this all works. How do I really support that going forward? Instead of trying to avoid my past like it was something that was bad, I was afraid that I was being coined again as a techie and not as a business person. And when I realized that that was the wrong way to think, and she helped me realize that by saying, wait a second, I am a technologist, and being a CTO, I should be proud of that. And I should be proud of how we enable companies through tech. And once I started to embrace that, we started to build on more technology partners, more investing, etc. But really found that there was a lack of understanding in these things that were really intrinsic into deep technologies. Not that nobody wants to invest in them, but they're not really diving into and understanding what they're trying to achieve. Because when you're coming from tech, if you don't understand code or understand the logic, becomes a lot more of a difficult understanding. And that's where we were able to take and dive into that.
Okay. Let's say you drop everything right now that you're doing. What's a startup you'll go and build?
Oh man, there's so many of them. It's crazy. I think one that I would share that, okay, I'll give you two. I think robotics is really an area that I find really, really exciting, and you're
Okay.
going to see a lot more of it. You know, a lot of, if you take manufacturing as an example, uh, the manufacturing over the last 10 years in North America has lost over 1 million jobs to automation, robotics. And that's just in North America alone, in the US. So you can see that there's a downshift to how can we create roles that can be automated and utilized by machinery fast enough that we can replicate and build on that. And you're starting to see a lot going in the restaurant space, cooking. They now have, and if you've traveled through certain countries, specifically Japan, everything is in you can get anything you want in a vending machine.
Yes.
So, you know, we maybe the rest of the world hasn't really adopted to that convenience level. But if you look at, there are companies out there doing spaghetti in a box. Like you literally can go and order a pasta that's made by a machine on the side of the street. So I think automation and robotics is really fascinating. I think you're going to see a lot more coming out of that space. The other thing that's really been plaguing my mind is when it comes to validation or verification, I think there's a lot more that can be done on it. And this will go all the way to securities, of course, and security is a big one in every country. But if you start to look at how do I validate the truth and the person behind the image or behind the business, how do I validate that that business is legit and not upselling me on something that they haven't achieved so that I can avoid the downfalls or the losses that may come from it? So I think there's something that can come out of that, which also ties into your SaaS models. So when you're going and getting a customer and they're buying a Bentley off your website, that you know that that person buying that Bentley is legit and it's not a scam, or it's not somebody trying to rip off the system. How do you find ways to validate that? And I think that's a continuous struggle in the SaaS model, and it loses trillions of dollars a year
Is
globally.
is crypto and Web3 the solution here? By having the blockchain and having this identification of uh, I'm verified on the blockchain by the people surrounded by me.
Yes and no. When you get into that type of level of governance, and the problem is that if you let it run long enough, that over the next 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 years, you eventually allow it to occur. And then that's where government regulations overstep the boundaries of control. And I think that's where we have to pay attention to some of these things, is that if you have too much information being shared and too much information being public knowledge, then you have too many bad players that utilize that to control too many elements of what you're doing or what your buying habits are. So I'm sure you've had the discussion where you're talking about a product and then all of a sudden you're on Instagram and every ad happens to do the fact that you were talking about a new garbage pail that you bought and now everything is about garbage pails. So there is a little bit things that are becoming too intrusive. They're stepping over the boundary lines. There was a lot of companies in the recent past that were purchased that were um, surveillance for the different cameras that are set up on your homes. So they were then able to go in and tap into those cameras and track people that were running away from a scene or whatever it might be. So I think it's getting to the point where it's going too far to the pendulum swinging too far where it's controlling too much of the narrative. And when you've got too much of that happening, I think then more products come out and we become less free as a
Right.
society, as people. And I think we have to kind of refine that down and protect ourselves from giving out too much information or okaying the allocation of too much information being shared, but at the same time letting systems analyze that information to give us a better outcome to make things easier without it being intrusive and forcing other issues where it becomes government controls or whatever it might be. So I think in time you find out where the middle is. So I think you're right that those pieces help, but they also can go too far. And my worry is that we let things go too far and then they become the norm. And then we wonder why we can't do certain things in the future. And I think that's the worry that everybody has.
Okay. Uh, my last question. You have $44 billion or $144 billion in your bank account. You've built and you've invested in anything you want to do. And it's the time for you to identify one problem in the world that you want to solve. It could be environmental, it could be on a country basis, it could be on a worldwide basis. What would be that problem? What would be your life mission?
I think that's a great question. The reason it's a great question is because you're putting something into somebody's hand and allowing them to make a choice with those dollars to say that those dollars would help them change the world. And entrepreneurship works in the reverse. It's where you have nothing that you want to solve the problem because your goal is the problem, not the outcome, the financial
Right.
outcome. Eventually it is. So when you have the financial outcome, I think that would weaken people's desire to solve a problem.
Okay.
But I think if I was to look at, I guess that's me overanalyzing it. If I was to look at a problem that um, you could solve today, and I think one that does stand out is, is universal income. Is this something that changes the way uh, people live? Does
Okay.
universal income change education? And I say it's different in every country, of course, but I think education is the number one piece. I think the more people learn, the more experience people have, the more great inventions they come up with. And in today's world, we're trying to go green. We're trying to solve the garbage issue, the plastics issue, the runoff of carcinogens that we push into the oceans, into the water. We're ruining ourselves by trying to be innovative. And I think that if we can educate more people and build a global education system that allows everybody to step up 10 notches to get to their real true understanding and power of themselves and what they can learn, I think that changes the way the world will work. I think you'll see more innovation, proper innovation that comes out and helps the world when you have more people that have a lot better, stronger knowledge base, because those people also, the more knowledge, you tend to probably waste less and find ways to be more efficient. So I think if you could solve the problem, and again, universal income is just a tactic to education. If you can find a way to help people become more educated, and I think the internet's done a lot by that, but there's also a lot of things that people shouldn't be watching that don't really influence their ability to learn, but influence their ability to act in the wrong ways. So how do you create a value and help people realize that they're being educated and educated in the right direction with the right information that helps them grow as an individual and build a stronger journey, which gets them building new companies in the future? I think that would be a great problem. And there's so many countries out there that could really use an uplift in their education system. And you would see the billion people in India and China be able to make a massive global difference because of their knowledge base. I think that would be pretty exciting to solve.
I love that. I think I could go on for another 2 hours speaking with you because of the amount of knowledge and stories you share and the amount of like just you're excited about what you're doing, and I could feel that energy. Honestly, I could go for another 2 hours without getting bored. So Jeffrey, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. It was an honor, a lot of learnings. Anyone who's listening to this podcast, go follow Jeffrey on LinkedIn, follow him on social media, find out what he's up to, and try to support or be a part of his journey because he's doing great stuff. Any last words? Where should people follow more of what we're doing? Are you hiring? Any plugs in you want to put in? Feel free to do so.
Ahmed, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and likewise, I could chat with you for hours. So it was very easygoing, but I appreciate the questions; they were brilliant. I think for anything I would share is, to the earlier part when we started the podcast, entrepreneurship is it's exciting, it's hard work, it's tough. You hit a million walls, but just know that when you're focused on doing one thing and being great at it, you will find every way to make that work. And every time you hit a wall, you'll find your way around it. And success is what you want success to be. So figure out before you do anything what success means to you, because I think that's heavily important, because that will put the drive and your excitement level into what you do. And I think, to your point, every day is exciting for me. I love what we have the opportunity to do. And we built this so that we could be sitting in front of great people like yourself and the rest of the world and have that opportunity. And you create those opportunities. So get out there, push yourselves, meet a lot of great people, network, communicate, share, and take in as much information as you can. Keep learning.
Thank you, Jeffrey.